In the far reaches of the galaxy, many species lived in harmony, their lives as peaceful as the stars themselves. The Galactic Council, a collection of various alien races, governed these planets, deciding laws and trade agreements. The Council's main focus was on peace. But deep in the corners of the galaxy, something was changing. A new, mysterious race had begun to appear on the outer borders of known space. But no one had been able to understand exactly who they were or what they wanted. The Council's members had heard the rumors. Reports came in from different systems. Ships that appeared out of nowhere, strange signals with no origin, and sightings of an unknown fleet. The most puzzling thing was that no one could find a trace of them. Every time an alien ship attempted to track them down, it ended in failure. Some said it was just another unimportant race, like many others that had come and gone in history. But one planet, known as the Zarthian system, had seen something different. Zarthian, a massive planet located at the edge of the Milky Way, was home to a race of peaceful beings called the Velcrians. They had long been known for their advanced knowledge of energy fields and the stars. Their society was built on cooperation with other galactic species. The Velcrians were among the first to report strange disturbances in their space. Ships would vanish without a trace, only to appear hours later in places they should not have been. And there were whispers of a terrifying new race, which they had named the Deathworlders. The Council called an emergency meeting to discuss the growing reports. Velcrians, whose technology had always been a step ahead, could no longer make sense of the new signals or the ships that seemed to disappear and reappear at will. They were convinced the Deathworlders were a threat, but the Council was hesitant. No one knew what these creatures looked like. They hadn't made contact, and there were no records of them. All they had were whispers and strange sightings. "We cannot risk sending a fleet to investigate a race we know nothing about," said a representative from the Aldori, a race of insect-like beings known for their precision in battle. "We must act carefully. These Deathworlders may be nothing more than a myth, but what if they are real?" asked the Velcrian ambassador, her voice laced with worry. "What if they are already among us? I've heard reports that they can travel at speeds beyond anything we have ever seen. If they are enemies, we cannot afford to ignore them." The council members fell into silence. It was true that the unknown race had become more active recently. The sightings were increasing, and many of the neighboring systems were now on edge, afraid that the Deathworlders were getting closer. But even with all this fear, there was still no proof. Only the Velcrians were certain, and they were known for their cautious nature. "We should send a small scout ship," suggested Zoran, a representative from a peaceful aquatic species. "It can travel far beyond our borders and report back. If we find nothing, we return. If we find something dangerous, we will be ready." After much debate, the council agreed. It would send a small fleet of 3 ships, each equipped with the latest technology, to investigate the mysterious force at the edge of their known galaxy. The fleet would be commanded by a seasoned officer, Captain Avlancor of the Velcrian Defense Force. She was respected throughout the galaxy for her wisdom and her calm under pressure. Her team was one of the best, and many believed they would find nothing more than a few rogue signals as the ships prepared for launch. The council's representatives watched from their distant stations. They weren't worried after all. What could a small, unknown race do against the might of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations? They were certain this was just another false alarm, another phantom enemy who would quickly fade into nothing. But they were wrong. Captain Kor's fleet left the spaceport on Zarthian, entering the darkness of the unexplored regions. They flew silently, each ship carrying an experienced crew that knew the risks of space travel. As they journeyed deeper into the unknown, they began to notice strange patterns in the stars' patterns that couldn't be explained by natural phenomena. The stars flickered, almost as if they were being watched, but no one could find the source. "We're getting close," Captain Kor said softly, studying the readings on her ship's console. "Stay alert. Something doesn't feel right." Second in command, Lieutenant Turan, glanced up from his station. "Captain, we're picking up a strange signal. It's not like anything we've encountered before. It's faint, but it's there. Can you trace it?" Captain Kor asked. "Trying, but it's moving in irregular patterns. Almost as if it's Avoiding detection, Terran replied, his brow furrowed. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence in the ship was heavy with tension. If the reports were true, they were about to encounter something they had never seen before, something powerful enough to outmaneuver them. "This is not a drill," Captain Kor said, her voice cold and firm. "Prepare for the unexpected. Whatever is out there, we will face it head on." As the ships moved deeper into the unknown, the strange signals grew stronger, their patterns becoming more erratic. The closer they got to the source, the more the crew felt the weight of being watched. It was then that they saw it, a shadow moving among the stars. It was fast, almost too fast for their sensors to track, and it wasn't just one ship. There were dozens, no hundreds, maybe more. The Deathworlders were not a myth. They had arrived, and they weren't here to negotiate. Captain Avalon Kor stared at the vast emptiness of space through the viewports of her ship. The stars outside twinkled faintly, but they felt distant, almost unreachable. The silence aboard the ship was heavy, filled with anticipation. Her fleet had traveled for days deep into unknown space, following the strange signals that had been growing stronger by the hour. There was no turning back now. "Captain, we're picking up another signal," Lieutenant Terran said from his console, his voice laced with urgency. "This one's stronger than the last. It's almost as if they're leading us somewhere." Captain Kor turned away from the viewport and walked over to Terran's station. He had a sharp look on his face, his hands flying over the controls as he tried to make sense of the signals. "Do you think it's a trap?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with concern. Terran hesitated. "I don't know, Captain, but the patterns are strange. It's almost like they want us to follow them." Avalon rubbed her chin thoughtfully. The Valkyrians had always relied on their superior technology and wisdom, but this was different. Felt as though they were being drawn into something that could change everything. "Increase the sensor range," she ordered. "If they want us to follow, we will. But I want to know what we're walking into before we do." The ship hummed softly as the sensors powered up. The crew remained focused, their eyes fixed on the consoles. Outside, the darkness of space seemed to press in on them, the unknown just beyond reach. As they moved deeper into the unknown space, the signals became clearer. The strange, irregular patterns that had baffled them before were now more distinct. Avalon's mind raced, trying to make sense of the data. She had been in battles before, faced enemies with weapons they couldn't imagine, but this felt different. It was as if they were being watched, but no one could pinpoint where or by whom. "Captain, we've got something," said Jera, the ship's communications officer. "It's a signal, but it's not a regular frequency. It's almost like a voice." Avalon walked over to Jara's station and peered at the screen. A strange sound filled the room, an unearthly, almost mechanical hum, with short bursts of static. It was unlike anything they had ever heard. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. "What do you make of it?" Captain Kor asked. "I can't translate it, Captain. But it's definitely some form of communication," Jera replied, her voice uncertain. Avalon's eyes narrowed. "If this is a message, we need to understand it." "Keep trying, Jera. We need to know what they're saying." Tension was growing. Among the crew, everyone knew that they were on the verge of something massive, something that could change the course of the galaxy. They had all heard the rumors how the Deathworlders were rumored to be warriors unlike anything seen before. But no one had expected this. No one had expected the silence to feel so heavy, or the unknown to feel so close. Suddenly, a loud beep echoed through the ship, cutting through the silence like a knife. Terran's eyes widened. "Captain, I've got a visual. We're not alone." Len rushed to his side, her heart racing. On the screen, a fleet of ships appeared out of the darkness, almost like shadows materializing from the void. The ships were massive, too massive to be a regular fleet of any known species. They were unlike anything the Valkyrians had encountered before. There was a sense of raw power emanating from them, as if the ships themselves were alive. "Report." "Terran," Captain Kor commanded, her voice steady despite the shock she felt. "We're being surrounded, Captain." "They've appeared from every direction," Terran replied, his fingers moving quickly across the controls. "They're fast. Can't outrun them. Avelin's mind raced. The ships were fast, but not just fast in speed. They were moving with a precision that suggested they knew exactly where to be and when to be there. They were coordinated like a well-organized swarm, and they weren't stopping. "Open a channel," Avelin said. Her voice was calm, but her thoughts were anything but. "Let's see if we can make contact." The crew waited in silence as Jara worked to establish communication with the unknown fleet. The strange hum from earlier seemed to echo in the background of the communication system. It wasn't a language they could recognize. Instead, there was a deep, unsettling silence before a new voice broke through, a voice that sent chills down the spines of the crew. "This is Captain Avelin Kor of the Valkyrian Defense Force," she said, her voice steady. "We come in peace." "Are you? And what is your purpose?" There was a long pause before the voice responded, its tone low and cold. "We are the Deathworlders, and you are trespassing." The words sent a wave of shock through the room. The crew stood frozen, unsure of what to make of the message. These were the beings the galaxy had feared, the ones whose very name had been whispered in fear. The Deathworlders were real, and they had found them. Avelin's mind raced. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice firm. "We want nothing," the voice replied. "We came to make a point. You will understand soon enough." The channel went silent. For a long moment, the crew stared at the screens, trying to process what had just happened. The mysterious Deathworlders had made contact, and they weren't offering peace. They were threatening them. Avelin's heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the weight of her next decisions pressing down on her. What did these creatures want? And why had they appeared now of all times? "We need to prepare," Avelin said, breaking the silence. "This is just the beginning." The crew began to move quickly, each of them knowing the gravity of the situation. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they were not going to back down. Captain Avelin Kor stood at the bridge of the Valkyrian flagship, her hands resting on the smooth surface of the console in front of her. The crew was silent, watching the screens as the fleet of mysterious ships continued to surround them. Deathworlders, those whose very name had been whispered in fear for years, were now closer than ever. The unknown was here, and it was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. "Captain, their ships are moving closer," Lieutenant Terran reported, his voice tense. "They're positioning themselves in a way that looks like they're preparing for an attack." Avelin's gaze didn't leave the screen. The Deathworlder ships were massive, their dark forms cutting through the emptiness of space like shadows. There was no sign of movement, no indication of weaponry, but the sheer size of their fleet was enough to make her stomach tighten. The feeling of being surrounded, of having no escape, was like a weight on her chest. "What do we know about their technology?" Avelin asked, her voice calm despite the growing tension. Lieutenant Terran shook his head. "Nothing, Captain." "There. Ships don't match anything we've seen before. No known energy signatures, no identifiable weapon systems. It's like they just ... appeared." Avelin took a deep breath, pushing back the unease that had settled in her mind. The unknown was powerful, and right now, all she had was her training, and the trust she had in her crew. "All right, keep scanning. Let's look for any weaknesses, anything we can use." As the crew worked, Captain Kor's mind raced. The Valkyrians had always prided themselves on their knowledge and their ability to adapt. But this was different. The Deathworlders didn't fit into any known category. They didn't communicate in any known language, and they didn't respond to diplomacy. It simply arrived with a message: "You are trespassing," and the silence stretched on for what felt like hours. The Deathworlders' ships didn't make any aggressive moves, but the tension was unbearable. Captain Kor could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. There was no room for mistakes. The wrong decision could mean the end of everything they had worked for suddenly. The silence was broken by a sharp beep from one of the consoles. "Captain, we're receiving another transmission," Jara, the communications officer, said, her voice urgent. "It's a direct link. They're trying to speak to us again." Avelin nodded. "Put it through." The screen flickered, and for a moment the crew saw nothing but static. Then, slowly, the image of a figure appeared, a tall, humanoid shape standing. Against a backdrop of darkness, the figure was draped in a dark cloak, and its face was obscured by a helmet, giving it an almost ghostly appearance. It wasn't clear whether the being was alien or human, but there was something unsettling about its presence. "You have trespassed in our space." The voice echoed from the screen, its tone cold and emotionless. "You do not belong here. You will leave, or we will remove you." Avalyn's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a conversation. It was a warning. The Deathworlders weren't here to negotiate. They had no intention of allowing the Valkyrian fleet to continue, so they were here too. "Drive them away." "We are not here to fight," Captain Kor said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We came to investigate. We meant no harm." The figure on the screen tilted its head slightly, as if considering her words. The silence stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. "You are insignificant," the voice responded, its tone flat. "You are nothing compared to what we have faced.
Ow.
Leave now, or we will make you understand." Before Avalyn could respond, the screen went black and the transmission was cut off. A chill ran down her spine. The Deathworlders weren't just powerful, they were confident in their ability to destroy them. The message had been clear. They were giving the Valkyrian fleet one chance to leave, but if they didn't, there would be consequences. Captain Terran said, his voice cutting through the silence. "They've powered up their weapons. Think they're getting ready to attack." Avalyn's mind raced. This was it. The decision she made in the next few moments would determine everything. If she ordered her fleet to fight, it could mean the end of the Valkyrian race. But if she ran, they would never be able to protect the galaxy from the Deathworlders. She had no choice. "Prepare for battle," Avalyn said, her voice hard and determined. "This is not a fight we're walking away from." The crew moved quickly, each one knowing the weight of the situation. The fleet had no choice but to fight. They had come too far to turn back now. "Captain, they're launching something," Jara said, her voice tense as she looked at the screen. It's not a missile. It's like they're sending something toward us. It's huge." Avalyn's eyes widened. The Deathworlders weren't just sending weapons. They were sending something bigger, something more destructive.
Ow.
"Brace for impact," Avalyn shouted. There was no time to prepare.
Ow.
The enormous object hurtled toward them with incredible speed. Its shape-shifting as it drew closer. The Valkyrian ships tried to maneuver, but the object was too fast, too powerful. It crashed into the lead ship with an explosion that shook the entire fleet. The shockwave sent a ripple of energy through the surrounding ships, knocking them off course. "Captain," Terran shouted. "The lead ship is down. We're losing shields." Avalyn's heart sank. The Deathworlders had made their move. The battle had begun, and it was worse than anything she could have imagined. The Valkyrian fleet, once powerful and confident, was now on the defensive. They were being hunted by an enemy they couldn't understand, and their survival was anything but certain. "Stay focused," Avalyn said, her voice steady, despite the chaos around her. "We can still fight back. Now we fight for our survival, and we fight for the galaxy."
Yes.
As the battle raged on, Avalyn knew one thing for certain. They were facing something far greater than they had ever imagined. The Deathworlders were here, and they were not going to stop until they had claimed victory. The battle had begun, and it was not what Captain Avalyn Kor had expected. The Deathworlders were relentless. Their ships seemed to appear out of nowhere, attacking with precision and overwhelming force. The Valkyrian fleet, despite its advanced technology, was struggling to keep up. "Captain, the shields are failing," Lieutenant Terran reported, his voice tight with urgency. "The enemy is too strong. We can't keep this up much longer." Avalyn's eyes scanned the view screen, her heart pounding. The lead ship of her fleet was already lost, its massive form engulfed in flames as it drifted toward the edge of the battlefield. The remaining ships, though powerful, were no match for the Deathworlders' speed and firepower. Their technology was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "Captain, they're not stopping," Jara, the communications officer, said, her voice shaking. "They keep coming, and they're not giving us any chance to negotiate." Avalyn's mind raced. The Deathworlders had made it clear that they didn't want peace. They wanted to wipe them out. The Valkyrians had fought many battles in their time, but this was different. There was no room for diplomacy here. There was only survival. "Target their engines," Avalyn ordered, her voice firm. "If we can disable their ships, we might have a chance." The crew worked quickly, and the remaining Valkyrian ships fired at the enemy fleet with all their might. Lasers and missiles flew through space, hitting their marks but barely slowing the Deathworlders down. The alien ships seemed to shrug off the attacks, their thick armor absorbing the damage with little more than a flicker. "Captain, they've locked onto us," Terran warned. "They're preparing another strike." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. The Deathworlders were playing a game she didn't understand, and they were winning. There had been no warning, no sign that they would face an enemy like this. The Deathworlders didn't seem interested in negotiation or surrender. They simply wanted to destroy. Suddenly, the ship jolted as a blast hit them. The lights flickered, and the control panel in front of Evelyn sparked as if it had been struck by lightning. She gritted her teeth, trying to hold on to her focus. They couldn't afford to lose any more ground. "Report," she demanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The shields are down to 30%, Turan replied quickly. "We've lost power to the aft engines. We're drifting." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Drift? That meant they were vulnerable? Without power, they were sitting ducks. "Get the auxiliary systems online now?" she barked. "If we lose this ship, we lose everything." The crew scrambled, working frantically to bring the ship back under control. But as Evelyn looked at the view screen, her stomach sank. The Deathworlders were closing in. They had already destroyed one of their ships. It was only a matter of time before they finished off the rest. "We can't hold them off much longer," Lieutenant Terran said, his voice low. "They're too fast, too powerful." Evelyn turned away from the screen for a moment, her mind racing. She couldn't let the fleet be destroyed. The Valkyrians had worked too hard to build the peace they had, and it couldn't end like this. She needed to find a way to turn the tide. "Jara, can you get a message out to the council?" she asked, her voice firm. "Tell them what's happening. We need reinforcements." Jara nodded, fingers flying across her console. "Try, Captain. But with their interference, I'm not sure if we can break through." The room was filled with the sound of frantic activity. The crew worked tirelessly to keep the ship intact, but every few seconds, another explosion rocked the vessel. The Deathworlders' attacks were precise, and their weapons were powerful. Evelyn gritted her teeth. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to destroy us. We need to fight back." "We're trying, Captain," Adaran said, his frustration. "Showing we're giving everything we've got, but we're outgunned. They don't even seem to be breaking a sweat." Evelyn's mind flashed back to the last words of the Deathworlder on the screen. "You are insignificant." It was a chilling thought. The Valkyrians had always believed in their ability to stand strong, to defend their homes. But now they were facing an enemy that didn't play by any known rules. The Deathworlders had no fear, no hesitation, and they seemed to have all the power. Then, a thought struck her like lightning. The Deathworlders had given them a choice before the chance to leave. What if they weren't just trying to destroy them? What if they wanted to make a point? Perhaps there was still a way to communicate. "Jara," Evelyn said, her voice suddenly calm. "Open a channel. Let's try to talk again." The crew looked at her, confused. But Evelyn held up a hand. "We're not giving up yet." Jara nodded and quickly established the connection. The same figure appeared on the screen, cold, emotionless, and powerful. The Deathworlder captain's voice echoed through the ship once more. "You should have left," the voice said, almost bored. "Your kind is not welcome here." "We came to investigate," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "We didn't know who you were, but we're not your enemies. We want peace." The Deathworlder's face remained hidden, but Evelyn could feel the weight of its gaze. The silence was thick, as if the figure were deciding whether to speak. "We did not ask for peace," the voice finally said. "You came into our space, you will leave, or we will make you." Evelyn's heart pounded. There was no negotiating with this enemy. They had been given their warning, and it was clear they wouldn't be spared. The Deathworlders weren't just invaders. They were a force of nature, and nothing would stop them. "Prepare for battle," Evelyn said quietly. "We will fight until the very end." In this part, the battle continues to escalate, and Captain Core realizes that the Deathworlders are not here to negotiate. The tension builds as the Valkyrian fleet struggles to survive against an unstoppable enemy. The story highlights the fierce determination of Avalyn and her crew, but also the overwhelming power of the Deathworlders. The stage is set for an intense and uncertain future, asked ChatGPT. The battle had raged for hours, and the Valkyrian fleet was in chaos. The once proud ships were now battered and broken, drifting through the cold void of space. Explosions shook the hulls, and the crew worked tirelessly to keep their ship together. Captain Avlancourt stood at the helm of the flagship, watching the destruction unfold. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way out, a way to turn the tide. "We've lost 2 more ships, Captain," Lieutenant Terran reported, his voice strained with worry. "The enemy's weaponry is too powerful. We can't keep this up much longer." Avalyn's heart sank. Every decision she made seemed to be leading them further into disaster. The Deathworlders had shown no mercy. Their ships were faster, stronger, and more advanced than anything the Valkyrians had ever encountered. It seemed like there was no way to win. Yet Avalyn couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on here. The Deathworlders weren't just attacking. They were sending a message. "Keep trying to get through to them, Avalyn," said, her voice firm but tired. "Maybe there's still a chance to talk." Jara, the communications officer, nodded and worked quickly at her station. "I'll try, Captain, but we've had no success so far. They're not responding to our messages." Avalyn clenched her fists. The Deathworlders had made their intentions clear. They wanted to wipe them out. But why? Why were they so determined to destroy a peaceful race like the Valkyrians? The galaxy was vast, and there were countless other planets to conquer. Yet the Deathworlders had chosen to focus on them. Her thoughts were interrupted by another explosion.
Ow.
The ship rocked violently, and the lights flickered. Avalyn gritted her teeth, struggling to keep her balance. She knew they couldn't take much more of this. "Captain, we've lost power to the forward thrusters," Terran reported. "We're losing speed. The enemy is closing in fast." Avalyn's mind raced. Losing speed was the worst possible outcome. It meant they were sitting targets, easy prey for the Deathworlders to pick off one by one. "Can we get the thrusters back online?" screamed, trying to keep the panic from creeping into her voice. "We're working on it, Captain," Terran replied, his fingers flying across the controls. "But it's going to take time. Damage is extensive." Avalyn nodded, her mind calculating their options. They were running out of time, and every second counted. She needed to do something, anything that would give them a fighting chance. "Jara," she said, her voice steady, "open a channel to the Deathworlder fleet again. This time, I want to speak with them directly." Jara looked up, surprised. "Captain, we've tried, I know," Avalyn interrupted. "But this time, it's different. We can't fight them with weapons. We need to fight with words." The communications officer hesitated, but then nodded, following the captain's orders. The screen flickered again, and soon the same figure from before appeared on the screen. The Deathworlder's face was still hidden behind a helmet, but the voice was unmistakably cold and unyielding. "You've made a mistake," the voice echoed. "Through the ship. Should have left when you had the chance." Avalyn took a deep breath and stepped forward, her eyes locked on the screen. "We don't want to fight. We came to investigate, not to invade. Our species is not your enemy." The figure remained silent for a long moment, the coldness of its presence palpable even through the screen. Finally, it spoke again. "You are weak," the voice said. "You have no place in our galaxy. We did not come here to make peace with you. We came to make sure you would never threaten our space again." Avalyn's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "We are not a threat to you. We only want to live in peace, but we won't run from you. We'll fight to protect our people and our way of life." The Deathworlder was quiet again, as if considering her words. For a moment, Avalyn dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this. "Then you will die for your pride," the voice said at last, its tone final and unforgiving. With that, the screen went black. The communication was cut off. "Captain, they're launching another attack," Terran said, his voice filled with urgency. "We can't hold them off much longer." Avalyn stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. The situation was dire. They were outmatched, outgunned, and running out of time. But as she looked around at her crew, she saw something in their eyes: determination. They had fought for peace. Now they would fight for survival. "Prepare for the final defense," Avalyn said, her voice filled with a new resolve. "We'll hold them off as long as we can. This battle is far from over." The crew moved quickly, following the captain's orders. The ship's remaining weapons were reloaded, and the shields, though weakened, were brought online one last time. The Valkyrian fleet was broken, but they were not beaten. Not yet. As the Deathworlder ships closed in, Avalyn watched them approach, her thoughts focused. If they could survive this attack, they might have a chance to regroup. If not, it would be the end. But even in the face of certain destruction, she knew one thing for sure: she would not let her people go down without a fight. "Fire!" Avalyn shouted, her voice carrying the weight of her resolve. The ship's weapons blazed alive, shooting out blasts of energy at the approaching enemy ships. It wasn't much, but it was all they had left. The battle was far from over, and though the odds were against them, Avalyn knew that the spirit of the Valkyrian people would not be extinguished so easily. The Deathworlders had underestimated them, and now the Valkyrians would show them just how much they were willing to sacrifice. The battle continued, and the Valkyrian fleet was now a shadow of its former self. Ships drifted aimlessly, their once proud forms broken and battered. Yet amid the chaos, Captain Avalyn held on to hope. It was a fragile thing, something she couldn't afford to lose if her people were to survive. Captain Lieutenant Terran called out, his voice strained. "We've lost our left flank. The Deathworlders have pushed us back even further." Avalyn didn't look away from the view screen. The Deathworlders were relentless. Their ships moved with terrifying speed, and their firepower was unmatched. The Valkyrian fleet was crippled, but they weren't done yet. There had to be a way. To survive? "How long can we hold out?" Avalyn asked, her voice steady despite the growing tension in the air. "Not much longer," Terran answered. "We're down to 20% power, and our weapons are almost exhausted. We've taken heavy damage to the engines. We can't outrun them." Avalyn's mind raced. The Deathworlders were closing in, and the possibility of reinforcements was slim. They had sent out a distress signal, but there was no way of knowing if anyone would hear it in time. As her thoughts swirled, she noticed something strange on the radar. A small blip, moving rapidly toward them from the far edge of the battlefield. "What is that?" Avalyn asked, leaning closer to the console. "It's another ship, Captain," Terran replied, his eyes wide with confusion. "It's not from our fleet, and it's heading straight for the Deathworlder ships." Avalyn narrowed her eyes. Could it be another alien race? Or perhaps a last-ditch attempt by the Council to intervene? She didn't know, but at this point, any help was welcome. "Open a channel," Avalyn ordered, her pulse quickening. The screen flickered, and for a moment Avalyn thought it was another Deathworlder ship. But then a familiar logo appeared on the screen. It was the emblem of the human fleet. A feeling of disbelief washed over her as she stared at the insignia. "Human fleet?" Terran whispered, his voice filled with awe. "But why would they be here?" Before Avalyn could respond, a voice came through the screen. It was deep, calm, and resolute. "This is Captain Michael Reed of the United Earth Fleet," the voice said. "We've received your distress signal. We're here to assist." Avalyn's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of the humans, the Deathworlders. The legend spoke of their strength, their resilience, but they had never been seen in the galaxy until now. And here they were, arriving in the nick of time. "Captain Reed," Avalyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "We are outmatched. The Deathworlders are destroying us. We need help immediately." "We've got you covered," Captain Reed replied, his tone confident. "Prepare yourself. Fight is far from over." Avalyn felt a rush of hope flood through her, the first real hope she had felt in what seemed like an eternity. The humans were here, and they were coming to their aid. She could feel the energy shift in the room. The crew, once downtrodden, now stood straighter. They weren't alone anymore. Lieutenant Terran, Avalyn said, her voice sharper now. "Activate all remaining defensive systems. Get us ready to move." Terran nodded quickly, his fingers flying over the console. "Aye, Captain. We're ready. Let's show them what we've got left." The Deathworlder ships continued their advance, unaware that reinforcements were on the way. As the human ship entered the battlefield, it moved with precision, cutting through the chaos. It was sleek and fast, its weapons lighting up the dark void as it engaged the nearest Deathworlder ship. The enemy ships, caught off guard, faltered for a moment, allowing the Valkyrian ships to retaliate. All ships, focus fire on the Deathworlder flagship, Captain Reed ordered, his voice strong and clear. Let's show them why they never should have underestimated us. Avlin watched in awe as the human fleet moved like a well-oiled machine. Their ships were smaller than the Deathworlders, but they fought with a ferocity that matched their reputation. The Valkyrian fleet, encouraged by this sudden change in the tide, regained some of its lost strength. The remaining ships fired with everything they had. Joining the humans in a combined assault on the enemy, the Deathworlders were not used to this kind of attack. Their ships, though powerful, were now struggling to keep up with the coordinated efforts of the humans and the Valkyrians. It was a fight unlike any other in alliance of species standing together against a seemingly unstoppable force. "Captain, we've breached their shields," Terran shouted. "We're getting through." The battle raged on, but with the humans now in the fray, the Deathworlders began to retreat. The Valkyrian ships, bolstered by the human strength, pressed the attack. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The Deathworlder ships that had once seemed invincible were now damaged, their weapons flickering and their movements sluggish. "Stay focused," Captain Reed's voice came through the channel. "We've got them on the ropes. We finish this now." The combined force of the Valkyrian and human fleets was too much for the Deathworlders to withstand. One by one, their ships began to break apart, their once imposing fleet crumbling under the onslaught. It was a hard-fought victory, but victory nonetheless. When the last Deathworlder ship exploded into a fiery burst, the silence that followed was deafening. Avlin stood there, her eyes wide with disbelief. They had done it. Against all odds, they had survived. "Captain Core," Captain Reed said, his voice calm but filled with respect. "We've got your back. You're not alone anymore." Avlin took a deep breath, the weight of the battle slowly lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've saved us. I won't forget this." The screen flickered and Captain Reed's image disappeared, leaving Avlin alone with her crew. The ship was damaged, but the fight was over. The Deathworlders had been defeated, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, hope had returned to the Valkyrian fleet. "Prepare to return home," Avlin ordered. "We've got a long road ahead of us, but today we've proven that we can stand together." The crew nodded, their spirits lifted. Battle was won, but the journey was far from over. And with the humans by their side, Avlin knew they would face whatever came next, dashed together in this part. The Valkyrian fleet is rescued by the humans, marking a turning point in the battle. With their combined forces, they defeat the Deathworlders and bring hope back to the Valkyrians. The story shows how alliances can be formed in the most unexpected of circumstances, and how hope can rise even in the darkest of times.